So I actually wanted to talk about Adam Silver as we move on to the next segment and the NBA schedule that actually came out over the weekend, meaning we know when the games will take place. We know the first two games are going to be on July 30th as Zion and the Pelicans take on the Utah Jazz. Zion and the Pelicans take on the team that ended pro sports as we know it because of the Rudy Gobert positive coronavirus test. And then we'll have the Battle of LA in the Lakers and the Clippers later on that night, as you would expect, because we are so starved for sports and still so thirsty and dehydrated without sports. So most of the reaction that I have seen or heard since the schedule came out was genuinely very good. Just complete utter ecstasy, so much excitement over the best games and best matchups and games you are really looking forward to most. And these days where we are going to get basketball from the early afternoon onto the evening nonstop, and just how glorious and special all of that seems to so many sports fans that will take anything right now, that are just so happy that it's now just not a idea, but it's becoming more of a reality that the NBA is going to come back and use this return to play format. But sometimes I can get into trouble because I'm too honest or too real, that I'm just not always going to take the rose-colored glasses out here. You guys know, like, I do my best to give you guys the most honest opinion as possible. And I'm not really always going to be Mr. Positivity on this show. And to be honest, that is how I feel right now about this whole NBA thing. I'm not as go-hung about it as a lot of other people, and I would like for you to give me a chance to talk about it, and I'd love for you to hear me out, and I would also love to get some of your thoughts here. This is, I think, a race against time. Most of the scientific community out there, most of the medical experts are saying that this is a race against time for us, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the pandemic come back, and it's already popping back up in places that reopened. But there is going to be the second wave that is going to happen, and that second wave threat or fears was one of the things that MLB owners actually used in their negotiation with players. We need to finish the regular season by this date. You can't push it into October or November. We don't want to risk it. We want to get the regular season over with ASAP. We want to get into the playoffs. We don't want to start this thing back up and then have to pack up our bags and go home. We want to get this in. And so when you have got a race against time, if you're at least going to allow for me to say that and for you to acknowledge it, let's just say you agree with me for the sake of argument here, right? And you agree with the scientific community that there is a threat, at least, for the second wave of a coronavirus, that it's a possibility, or it's possible that we get a second wave. Let's just say, theoretically, you agree with that statement. When you're up against something like that, in my opinion, you can't afford to waste a single second. You don't have time to fool around. You don't have time to move at a slow pace. You have got to go. There has to be at least some sense of urgency. And my biggest issue with this NBA schedule is how much time they've been wasting. And I remember getting on Adam Silver when the report first dropped that the NBA wanted to restart on the 31st. And I realized, damn, that's late. And that is not even what I'm talking about here. I was just referring to in that statement that the playoffs would be starting on the 31st, and I was like, wow. And this was a couple weeks ago. I was like, wow, that's a little late. But not only is it that, that's not the start of the playoffs. That's when the end of the regular season period is going to start, that 8-game stretch. And how much time is wasted playing games here that, in my opinion, those games just don't matter. And Adam Silver's biggest goal in this NBA tournament should be to crown a champion. His goal should be to hand out the Larry O'Brien trophy to declare that even in these crazy times, right? In these awful times, the NBA pushed through, preserved, and found a way to do it and they crowned a champion. That there's not going to be a fake it spot on the record books. There's not going to be a year where we're going to have to explain to our grandkids why in 2020 there was no NBA champion. That should be the primary concern and number one goal of Adam Silver and with this schedule. And I don't see that. With this schedule, I see the NBA that has stretched out its schedule, that's playing 8 extra games. A lot of it is just to make up for the money lost with the TV networks and partners there. So I see what they're doing it, and they're risking no conclusion to the season because they want to get extra games in. And this whole idea that it's really important for the NBA to get Zion Williamson in the spotlight for the next few weeks. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it just seems to me like this whole return to play format was designed to get more of Zion Williamson's games. And he's a freak athlete and a huge name, and he's a bright light for the future of the NBA. But I'm not prioritizing making Zion Williamson into a bigger name right now at risk of endangering the conclusion of the NBA season. Who cares if the start of the movie is great, right? And gets you stuck in, if there's no ending that ties all those loose ends together? So I'm just very confused, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this return to play plan. The idea here to me that we're going to waste almost a month determining seeding, I think is just silly. I don't think it's worth it. NBA teams have played 60 plus games. They've played 3/4 of their season, and then a pandemic hit. And as unfortunate and as horrible as this has been, when something like that happens, there are going to be consequences and disappointment. It's not fair. Ask a lot of college basketball players and Vince Carter and people who have lost their jobs and family members. Just ask them how unfair this pandemic has treated them. We don't need something that eats up 2 to 3 weeks to just see who will end up being the Lakers' sacrificial lamb in the first round of the playoffs. That shouldn't be important. The NBA should be thinking about how do we make sure we have enough time to crown a champion. Even if you also don't believe in or put any value into the talk of the second wave and the virus repeating and coming up again, I would also be thinking, if I were Adam Silver, that I don't want to put my conference finals and NBA finals up against the NFL. I'd like to get my season done as soon as possible. If I could get my season done in 4 to 5 weeks, that's what I would do. They're going to spend almost a month playing regular season games in this bubble and playing the first round of the playoffs, which of all the major sports, the NFL, NHL, NBA, and MLB, there's really no bigger waste of time in a playoff than the first round of the NBA playoffs. And I get it. I'll still watch it because it's basketball. But let's be honest, especially during these circumstances, is there really a need for a first round of the NBA playoffs when it's really risking the possibility of you having and playing the NBA finals due to the concerns of the second wave of the coronavirus? But going back to the first round, it's super predictable. You know who is going to win almost every single round, and I know people will come back and say those are when they are played on home courts and in full arenas, and it might be different now that we are in a bubble and playing with no fans, but for the most part, like you guys know, in the NBA, fans aren't winning games. The players are. You know, the sixth man in the crowd of 18,000 fans isn't winning a basketball game. And once again, let me say it again, especially during these times in the midst of a pandemic, when your goal is to crown a champion ASAP, I just don't know if that's the proper excuse or the proper counter argument to the point I'm trying to make here. And we're talking about the league that in the last 5 years, there have only been 6 first-round upsets. That's it. 5 years, 6 first-round upsets. And of those 6 upsets, 5 of them has been a 5 seed over a 4 seed. So that means in 5 years, we have had only one major upset in the first round of the NBA playoffs, when you have a 6, 7, or 8 seed winning in the first round. And when you stretch it out and make it a best of 7 series, the best team does prevail about 90 to 95% of the time. And some people will say the NBA is too predictable. Other people will say that is why the NBA playoffs aren't as good compared to others, because most of the time going in who exactly is winning. So it really depends on what exactly you value. So then you ask the question of, what is the point in having these early round games? And so much of them. If I were Adam Silver, I would have said we are only taking the playoff teams to Orlando for one, because it's smarter, because it's fewer people there, and there are fewer people to worry about. There are fewer people that are potentially exposed. There are also fewer people that could potentially get infected, and that's why numbers are currently limiting. That's why we don't want big crowds, as the fewer people we have at something, the better. So I would come back with 16 teams. I would the top 8 seeds in the East and the top 8 seeds in the West. I would have made the first round of the playoffs best of 5, like it used to be, the rest best of 7, and I would have gotten in and I would have gotten out as soon as possible. And I would have not dragged it on, because the longer it goes on to, let's say, they're doing their best to keep the virus out. If it gets in and it affects teams, and let's just say it's late and it happened because you dragged this thing into October, and it affects one of the 2 teams that are playing in the NBA Finals, well, then you are not going to have a champion and achieve your ultimate goal, or at least a legitimate champion, especially if it's late. If something like that happened early, you would still have enough time maybe where you can wait a few days and then get back on the court. But this thing is made for television. They want to have as much inventory as possible. They want to get Zion Williamson out there. But the whole thing, I just don't think it's very smart. It's not focusing on the right things, and it's not prioritizing the right things. Adam Silver has to be thinking about making sure that the NBA season ends with a champion with some version of confetti and champagne. Not, well, oh crap, we got to call this whole thing off. We're late in September. We got to bag this thing because the virus is back in force. Society's shutting down. Flights are grounded and everything's taken a big step back. We got to shut things down because we are wasting time playing games like Wizards Bucks and Nets Celtics, because we were playing these games. We weren't able to get the real games that mattered in. And why would you want those games if everything goes according to plan? Why would you want to make your biggest games go against the NFL's games? That makes zero sense to me. You aren't beating out a Thursday night football game with even a Lakers-Bucks NBA Finals game. I get a tendency sometimes when I look at smart people who are in charge, and this is a big decision by the NBA, when I see them laying out a format and I see them put everything together. I see them put everything out there, and so much time and energy and money has gone into it, and it doesn't make common sense. Like, that really frustrates me. And so that's where I am right now. Why do we need to play games for seeding? Why is it so necessary to determine who the 8th seed in the Western Conference is? Why do we need to figure out who makes the playoffs in the East? The Wizards or the Magic for the next 2 weeks? Like, why does any of that matter? Why does it matter if the Mavericks are the 7th seed or the 6th seed? Like, why is that important? Why do we need to go through this whole thing to determine who, if the Clippers can catch up to the Lakers, which looks like a pretty tough wall to climb right now, and catch the Lakers, and have to wait another 3 weeks to see the 2 teams play against each other in the Western Conference Finals? Don't make us wait for all the big games. This is a race against time, and I just don't think the NBA recognizes that. I don't care about Memphis and Portland. That game, yes, is something on, but I'm afraid we're sacrificing the potential NBA Finals because we have to make sure we get these goofy games in right now. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. I guess as of right now, before I've heard anything, I feel like I'm in the minority here, and one of the only people who doesn't really like the NBA's plan to return. I think they're wasting too much time, and that time is too valuable right now. And I want to know what you guys think. I'm not the biggest fan of Adam Silver's return to play plan. I just laid it out there for you guys. And yeah, moving on.